Hello, everyone, and welcome to Shift, Real Stories, Real Transformation. My name is Sheila Kelly, and I'm delighted today to welcome Rosemary Davies-Janes as my first guest on Shift. Rosemary and I met, we can't believe it, 20 years ago in Quebec City, Canada, at an International Coach Federation conference. Rosemary was speaking from the stage with a colleague, Michael Bungay-Stanier, and I was in the audience. And somehow over the years, we've maintained connection. And most recently, over the past few years, we've gotten to know each other on a more personal level. And Rosemary is somebody that I know has experienced many shifts in her own life and in her career. So I think she's just a great person to feature on the first episode of Shift. So Rosemary, if you could share with us maybe 3 or 4 times over your life that you've experienced what you consider some pretty major shifts and the deeper meaning of each of them and how they've propelled you forward. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Sheila. I'm very happy to do that. So my understanding of the whole shift process, and I've been thinking about this since you invited me to be on the podcast, or the webcast, I guess is the correct term. And I've been thinking back over the shifts in my life. All of the shifts that I've noticed, and some of them took a little bit of time to percolate, and come to full strength, have happened as I have shifted off the life path of doing what I should do and following parental directives, cultural norms, societal norms, and reclaimed my own authenticity, given my natural tendencies a chance to express themselves. So, as I understand it, and I'll jump into the specific shifts, but as I understand it, life is a path for all of us, an opportunity to learn and grow and expand our awareness, our insight, and, just elevate ourselves to a different level. And when we get comfortable, when we are following status quo, when we are overriding what our authentic selves want us to do, for many reasons. There's very good reasons for doing this: staying safe, protecting ourselves. The greatest fear of all humans is to be pushed out of the tribe, because on our own we can't survive. We are, as creatures, we are connected to all other humans and all life forms, and to be pushed out is probably the greatest fear we all have. So we don't recognize it as fear necessarily, but fear is what keeps us towing the line. So yeah, my first big shift, even though I didn't realize that was what was happening at the time, what happened when I was 10 years old. My family had been transferred. My dad worked with Ford Motor Company, and his work transferred us all to Australia. Left when I was 4, got back when I was 10.
And you were in Canada at the time?
Yes, my dad, he actually immigrated from the UK to Detroit. My mom also immigrated from the UK, did not want to live in the States. She wanted to live in, I think she called it a colony back then. And so they settled in Windsor, Ontario, which is right across the border, a short drive to Detroit. And I worked there, but we lived in Windsor. So we went from Canada, which, border cities are always a blend of cultures. The TV stations came from the US mostly, and so went from there to a little town called Geelong, about half an hour drive south of Melbourne. Beautiful place. We spent weekends walking the beach with the dog all year round. Like, it does get cold, but it's not cold like we know in Canada. So while we were there, they had some issues keeping their imported talent, expats, um, in the country, because it was just also strange and different back then. Wives were ignored. They were not allowed to work. They were just, necessary accessories to take care of children. So my mom and dad and my brother and I were there, and she was very unhappy. And but we loved it. We loved the outdoor living aspect and so on and so forth. And in order to keep their executives there, they were very well paid. And as kids, we went to the best schools, and they had some very good schools there. So my first school experience in Australia was at a Church of England girls' grammar school, which has been since absorbed into Geelong Grammar, which, the Prince of Wales at the time was sent there for an experience. It was very, very highbrow. So I had elocution lessons, I wore a uniform, I was very much involved in this colonial lifestyle. And when dad did turn down the big opportunity that they were grooming him for, after mom said, you pick your family or you pick your job. Uh, we came back and I went to, like, he still stayed with Ford, but probably not the job he would have liked. And my brother and I went to this very blue collar public school, because Windsor's a pretty blue collar town still to this day. And we didn't fit in. My brother did a better job of adapting than I did, but I was this kid. I didn't know what to wear to school for the first thing because I was used to a uniform. So I showed up like hugely overdressed. My mother did my hair the way someone in their 40s would do their hair. So I just, it was, I looked funny. I spoke funny. I brought weird things to lunch, like Marmite sandwiches that after a few hours in the desk, it was a flip top desk, you put your sandwich inside. They did start to emit a bit of aroma. And I didn't know, I had nothing in common with these kids. So that was my big first shift. It's like at 10 years old, do you cling to authentically who you are, or do you adapt in order to stay attached to your peers? And my choice was to adapt. And of course, it was conscious, but it was not conscious at the same time. It seemed like the very natural thing to do. It's like, okay, who do I have to be for these people to accept me?
Yeah,
So
it's like, how do I survive?
yeah,
Because that's what it is, the survival within the tribe. You've just articulated that, right? So how do I cope? How do I survive? How do I fit in?
mhm.
And wow, so it was a real culture shift. So what what was it inside of Rosemary
Well,
that got you there?
I've always been very curious, and I'm also very creative. So my brilliant idea as a 10-year-old, I was an avid reader. I would spend summer vacation reading, reading, reading. So I thought, okay, well, I really like this character from this book. So I'm going to be her and see
Mm,
how she gets
mm,
accepted.
mm,
So it was
mhm,
almost like a disassociation of sorts.
mhm, mhm,
And I went through a few characters and found one that did pretty well. And I also, during this process, I honed my ability to, um, and this is not a skill I recommend for anyone, to sort of attune with people, sense what I thought they wanted from me, and become the person that delivered that. Now
mhm,
that's a lot of work, but
mhm,
it
mhm.
seemed like it was my way of staying safe and accept.
Yeah, well, I can't be myself. That's not working.
Yeah, yeah,
That's not working. So this was your first conscious, um, um, not experience, but becoming a character in a
yeah.
play. And, at a very deep level, that's what a lot of us are doing a lot of the time. We're trying to be somebody that other people will accept. And did it work for you
It did
at
for a
any
little,
level?
it
Yeah.
did for a little while, but the sort of the dark side of that, the shadow side of that, is that all of my natural inclinations, like I was still an artist, I was still creative. You can't
Mhm,
quash those
mhm, mhm,
parts of your nature, but my feelings, you
mm,
know, they all got packed down. They all got numbed out.
mm, mm,
And that, when you start that young,
mm,
it
mm.
takes a lot of work to unpack them and release them
Yeah,
later.
and
So
do
it's
it.
like
And
if someone annoyed me, I would just quash that and put a smile on. It was sort of
mhm,
I
mhm,
I I I started treading the path of the people pleaser because
mhm,
I
mhm,
didn't understand why people. I honestly didn't understand. I took it very personally. Like
mhm,
as an adult now, I can look back and say, okay, well, this, I was like an alien dropped into a new planet.
mhm, mhm,
Course, like they couldn't
mhm,
relate to me. Like, I was
mhm,
talking about wombats and didgeridoos, and these are 10-year-old kids who, that their dad works on an assembly line and mom does whatever she does. And a
mhm,
lot of them
mhm.
didn't, they were stay-at-home moms back then. So, you know, it was very different. So,
Well, it's a very, very stark example of how, as children, we do what we think we need to do to win acceptance, to fit in. And so kudos to you, Rosemary, for being that smart little girl who, the cost of it, you've articulated, the cost of it was stark.
mm,
You had to give up a part of yourself to meet the expectations of others.
yeah.
And I've got a feeling that that continued for quite a while.
It did. It was interesting. Just as we're speaking, this is popping up. Because I had developed this skill with my peers, I was still being authentically me at home,
Mm,
and probably a little more authentically me than before because it was a release valve. Because
mhm,
I was doing
mhm,
all of this washing when I
mhm,
was at school all day. So, and then one day I just got tired of getting into trouble for being me. So it's like, okay, well, if I can do this at school, let's do it at home. So I put on this good girl persona
mhm,
and it got rewarded.
mhm,
So I again quashed what was left of my authentic self
mhm,
and said, okay, well, I'll be good.
mhm, mhm,
And because I'd had a little bit of practice and
mhm,
that that took me further down the people pleaser road and
mhm,
further away from my authentic self.
mhm,
Rewards were there. I was, you know,
mhm,
I avoided all the trouble and all the issues.
mhm,
Again, there were there were there was a shadow to that as well.
mhm, mhm.
Yeah,
Wow, I just feel sad for that little girl
yeah.
who's becoming a teenager, which is always fraught with landmines in and of itself.
Mhm.
So what pulled you, assuming something pulled you back, what pulled you back from that inauthentic Rosemary?
Well, it's very interesting. I was on that path for a long time, and gosh, it was. I think it was the experience I had at the end of high school. I came up with this theory as a somewhere between somewhere around the time, maybe between 10 and 12 or 13, that the Southern Hemisphere was much more accepting and friendly, and I wanted to get myself back there. So, some the daughter of some of my parents' friends went to Denmark on a Rotary international exchange for a year. So I thought, you know what, I would really like to get out of this location, and that seems an acceptable way to do it. Like my parents will be happy if I get the scholarship. So I focused on working really hard at school to get the grades up there because you had to have straight A's.
Mhm, mhm,
Otherwise I wouldn't look at you. And I was successful.
mhm,
And I was an artist, a creative, and I went to South Africa. And
mhm,
my hosting Rotary Club down there was very kind. There was an art college in town. And
mhm,
rather than having me go to a high school, which is normal for Rotary exchanges,
mhm,
they
mhm,
had set up for me to attend art college for a year.
mhm, mhm,
And it was a wonderful opportunity, just to meet other people who were artists, other weirdos like me. I fit in, even though I didn't speak the language. They spoke Afrikaans, which is a colonial version of Dutch, just as Quebecois is a colonial version of French.
mhm, mhm,
Um, and they taught me, and they took me on. It was like they made me an honorary Afrikaner before I could even
Oh,
say.
nice, nice.
And I just felt so accepted and uh, you know, like I belonged. And it was a wonderful experience. So at that point, I got very interested in psychology. It's like, okay,
Mm,
what makes people tick? Why would little girl me, who never had any problem fitting in Australia, be so thoroughly rejected when
mm, mm,
I landed back in Canada? And then,
mm,
here I out of the blue, as I think I was 17, 18 when I arrived in South Africa, and I was embraced with open arms. And it's like,
mm, mm.
this is really weird. So
Yeah,
it's
I'm the same person.
I'm still me.
I'm Rosemary. Yeah, yeah.
So, after that, I went back to university and changed. After living in South Africa, I had been planning to study political science. That took that right off the table because I had got a
Mhm,
close-up
mhm,
view of, what was really happening, what was in the papers, and I decided nobody can really know what's going on in politics. So I switched my major to psychology and delved into, what makes people tick. At that
mm.
point in time, though, it was mostly focused on dysfunction,
Yes,
and
yes,
the
yes.
positive psychology movement hadn't been born, but
Mm, mhm.
it started, it opened a doorway into that path that percolated over a number of years. And yeah, it took, it was a slow brew.
So I sense that you're moving closer to being who you really truly are. And so what's next on the path that aids in a shift?
Mhm.
Or like feels like we're going deeper. We've
Yeah.
started here, or maybe we're going higher, whatever the metaphor is, but we've started here. We've had some really rather interesting and amazing life experiences. By the time you're 18 years old, you've experienced 3 different cultures
Mhm.
and gotten a glimpse of what makes Rosemary tick.
Yeah.
So, what's next on the journey?
Well, it was interesting. Something did get released after that experience in South Africa. And I I no longer unthinkingly chose to be a people pleaser. So
Mhm,
there was something, I think of my inner child as a wild spirit. Like, this when I was 3 and 4, I was climbing trees. I was a real tomboy. I was, picking snails up off the driveway so they wouldn't get crushed when the cars pulled in. I was taking snakes for walks in my doll carriage. I was very anti-conventional.
mhm, mhm,
So I picked and I chose what I would and wouldn't do, but it was more, I was starting to come to the point where what my heart wanted was more my North Star than
mhm,
what was expected or what I should do.
mhm,
And
mhm,
I met my husband when I was, gosh, only 21. And there was no cognitive reason for me to be so drawn to him, but there was something in him that I knew I needed to. It was so attractive. I couldn't overcome it. And there were many logical reasons for me not to choose him. He had been married twice before. He was actually still married when I met him. And I thought, okay, that's good. That's safe. There's not going to be any entanglement. It's just going to be something purely physical or whatever. I won't get enmeshed. Ooh, that was not quite accurate. So we did get divorced. We got together. We were together for 15 years, and it was um it was interesting. It was a good place for me to percolate, what do I really want? And at the end of our marriage, what he wanted and what I wanted were so disparate. I knew that, if I committed to going forward with him, um, I was never going to find myself.
So you got lost again.
I
You
got I
lost
got
yourself
lost
again.
I got lost in his world.
Yes,
But while
yes.
I was lost, there was this processing going on inside me
Mhm,
that was making it clear that, being in his world it was a lovely place to hang out. He was a musician. There was lots of music. He had 3 kids from his 2 former marriages. I got to pilot being a mom. We had a child together, and
Mhm,
she loved her dad very much. He just passed
mhm,
away.
mhm,
And it was a really good experience. His extended family are amazing. I'm still in touch with them.
mhm,
It was a good cocoon. I think that's probably a good way to.
mhm, mhm,
It was a
mhm.
good cocoon, and it lasted for a while. And then I came out the other end. It's like, okay, I got to figure out who I am. So,
Again, again.
and, and how who I am authentically can function in this world where, there's the shoulds and the cultural
Mhm,
expectations and so forth. Um, yeah, so when we split up, this in a 12-month period, and I don't recommend this to anybody, I got my divorce became final. I sold our matrimonial home, bought a new house for myself, quit my corporate work, and started my own business.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, you and I have talked a bit about this, how, sometimes we get advice, well-meaning advice that, take the plunge, jump off the cliff. And it sounds like that's what you did. At the end of your marriage, you kind of took a leap of faith. And I know you well enough to know that in the end, it has worked out. You're
Mm.
doing well, you're still here. But as you've just said, you wouldn't recommend it.
No, no. It was kind of as if I was creating a blank canvas for myself. It's like now it's time for me to create, the create the artwork that is my life.
Mm, mm,
However, I didn't really take a lot of, well, I let my heart lead, and my heart was not concerned with finances. It's like, you'll work it out somehow. And I did.
mm, mhm,
Um, and at this point, because my daughter was only 6 at that point. So I was also a single stay-at-home mom. That was part of what drove my decision to start my own business, because when I'd been married and worked in corporate, I left the house at 7 and I got home at 7.
mhm, mhm,
And that was what was expected. And it was what was needed, because when you're salaried, when you're heading up the marketing division for major retailers, like I worked with in that capacity at Toys R Us and Staples,
mhm, mhm,
you're a working executive, and there's
mhm,
just too much to do, and you got to
mhm,
look after your team and so on and so forth.
mhm,
So
mhm.
it was, this is just me. I don't have a team. It's just me starting a new thing.
Yeah,
Uh,
sounds very glamorous, very freeing. You're the CEO now of your life and of your business. And was there any fear?
There wasn't, well, yes, there was. There was fear, but the excitement outweighed the fear.
Mm, mm,
And, I had a history in the corporate world of pushing back again, especially against bad bosses.
mhm,
The
mhm,
whole ethos at the time was, when you're an employee, you have to make your boss look good. And if
mhm,
my boss asked me to do something that didn't make sense to me, I would challenge them.
mhm, mhm, mhm,
And say, I'm not doing this. Even to this day, if I'm being asked to follow a protocol that's there because it's always been there, but makes no sense to me, I will ask for it to be explained
mhm,
so that I can understand. And if it's just, we just do this because we've always done this, it's like, I'm out. I'm not doing that.
I understand that.
Yeah.
It's amazing how people can find questions very so challenging because I'm a question asker, and it's like I just asked a question, like why are you getting so upset?
Yeah.
So you've shifted again
Mm.
from corporate executive, stay mom, to having your own business and striking out on your own and with so much excitement. And tell us how that went and how that led to the next shift?
Yeah, well, it was interesting. One thing I noticed in the corporate world, and I've sort of skipped all my work history, is how many people were working alongside me who were also quashing, their authentic selves. I'll just put it that way. They had so many other interests and talents. And, the direct marketing manager at Staples, he was a natural comedian and he was a data bunny. He was crunching numbers all day, and saving and that's part of what inspired me to start my own business. There are so many people who have so much talent, but the fear to shift out of what's comfortable and accepted into what's unknown and exciting. The fear blocks so many people from following their hearts. And I wanted to help people. And it was interesting that the work that I did initially, I called it authentic personal branding. Really, I worked very hard to prove to people that they were who they were authentically, that they had these strengths, that this is what, like I did a whole 360 assessment. This is what other people think of you, truly. And was across a spectrum of people who knew them well, knew them moderately well, didn't really know them at all. Maybe the person who sold them coffee every morning at the coffee shop. So the heavy lifting for me was, using, psychometric tools, all these things to prove to people that they really were who they authentically were. And once they took in this overwhelming amount of evidence that they were as amazing as they were in their own way, that opened up for them pathways. And I would continue to work with them. It's like, okay, how can you use this strength in a way that's fulfilling for yourself and beneficial for others at the same time? And doing that work did allow me to be authentically me. uh, because I'd been groomed enough in the conditioning, the shoulds of the world to understand that I had to do the heavy lifting to prove to people how awesome they were, that they could go back to, they could keep going back to. And that would open them up to, taking their authentic selves into the future and really, painting their own canvas in the way that they chose.
I can feel how that fulfilling that was for you,
Mm.
that you were able to help others go a little deeper and tap into their more authentic self. I also know, that recently that business collided with your personal life in a way that, from my perspective, looking from the outside in, created a huge, huge shift
Yeah.
in the direction of your life and your career path. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, one thing that, I had trained as a coach at Coach U, and I was putting myself as an out there as an authenticity and authentic branding coach. Um, but what most coaches don't tell you is it's really tough to make a living as a coach, especially when you're in a totally unknown niche. This is kind of the pattern of my life. I've always been on the cutting edge.
Mm,
So
mm.
my early conversations with prospective clients, I talked to them about branding and they'd say, oh, branding, you mean like branding cattle? And I would have to say, no, no, more like branding Coke and Pepsi.
I
So that,
remember those days.
so
Yes.
I got to do a lot of educating in early times about what personal branding was.
Mm,
And when I got to the point where, I had made huge inroads, but even working as hard as I could, I was making ends meet, but no more. So I got together with some of my biggest supporters, my advisory team. We did this big sort of 10th anniversary thing at the Fontainebleau Hotel in Miami Beach. And it was amazing. We had dinner with Les Brown and we were going to treat him, and then he picked up the tab. It was an amazing experience. And what my advisory team told me to do is, stop doing all the work yourself, build a program, that people can self-study, write a book. And really by taking their advice, I tanked my business. And at the same time, I had met a new partner almost 10 years after my mom. Yeah, actually exactly 10 years after my marriage ended. And he was, he was seemed, very engaged, very in love with me. I wasn't in love with him to that same degree, but he made me laugh. He was interesting. I couldn't figure him out, which was the main appeal because most people, I'd learned to figure most people out pretty quickly. So he was intriguing. And it's like, let me make your life easier. If you want to write your book, if you want to write your program, I'll support you financially. Just so I killed my business by shutting it down to build these devices that were going to make my business more like make it easier for me to run the business, bring in more money. So I wasn't just making ends meet.
Mm, mm,
So it didn't feel quite right. I allowed myself to be talked. That was a shift I allowed myself to be talked into. And
mhm,
the
mhm,
one remaining parental figure I had left who was very important to me, my godmother, I met with her over Christmas that year. We visited her, and I told her of this dilemma. It's like, I've got this man who says he wants to make life easy for me. And she said, well, I've always wished for you a soft place to land.
mm,
And I thought, well, you know, my life journey so far, has been one where you walk down the road and there's signposts. It's like easy street this way, big challenge that way. I've always gone the big challenge
big
route.
challenge. Yeah.
So I thought, well, maybe it's time for me to do the
Mm,
easy street.
mm, mm,
So I allowed this relationship to continue and it developed. And it was it was quite a journey. It turned out that this partner was a covert narcissist and
mm,
also a con man who, in the course of our time together, managed to cut my net worth in half. And when I say that, my house had appreciated in value. I didn't have savings, but he convinced me to do what I'd never done before and withdraw equity from the house on 3 occasions. And I was very, very lucky when it came time to sell it that the market had gone so high that I managed to recoup a lot of that. But I got myself in this emotionally abusive relationship that caused me to question myself greatly and put me in sort of a cocoon where I dissociated to protect myself. But you know, the wake up came a few months before, like the mental wake up came a few months before the physical wake up call. And I was I was paging through some online courses and came across this course called "When Is It Time to Leave?" Because I was pretty sure that our relationship was toxic and it was not good. And I contacted the author. She wrote a book. If he's so great, why do I feel so bad? And I don't remember the author's name right now, but I'll let you know. And it was full of case studies of people who sounded a lot like me, who had got into relationships that undermined their self-confidence and cost them money and made them feel horrible about themselves. And so having that realization, I very privately worked with my attorney, and I had to do this very privately because this partner had worked as a therapist. He also had a master's in organizational psychology. He had qualified as a master practitioner in NLP. He had trained as an Ericksonian hypnotherapist. So, and he told me this. He was watching my eye patterns, listening to my breath patterns. Like I felt like a bug on a microscope around him. So I did all of this strategizing to end the relationship. I would go out
I'll
for a
just interrupt for a minute, just in case there's anybody listening who doesn't know what NLP is. It is neuro linguistic programming. So, with emphasis on programming. And yes, I'm not versed in NLP, but I know that it can be very effective, but like any tool or any training, it can be misused.
It can.
So, in the hands of somebody who may be a covert narcissist, it can be used in harmful ways. So, I just thought I'd clarify that. And
Oh, thank you. Thank
before
you.
you continue,
I appreciate that. So I was out, I had, and this was sort of colliding with the onset of COVID too in
Mhm,
2020.
mhm,
Um, So I was doing all, like, because of course, one of the things that this individual did was he isolated me from my friends and family. So I reconnected with my support network. I booked a session with the therapist that wrote the book to just confirm, like, because it felt nuts. I can't be going through this. No,
Yes, yes.
me. And she
Yes, I'm
confirmed
too
all that.
smart.
And
I'm
it's
too
like,
smart.
yeah,
Yes,
well, it's just like, is like this really be happening? And
yes.
so I worked with my lawyer because one of the things this individual asked me to do is to make him beneficiary in my will.
Mhm,
Because at
mhm.
that time, my daughter was a teenager going through all the teenage stuff. It's like, well, I'll help her sell the house. She can't do all this on her own. So, but once my eyes were opened, I got in touch with my lawyer, changed my will, made my daughter the beneficiary, cut him and all his, anything connected to him out of there. Changed all my bank accounts because he'd had access to my bank accounts because he had no income. I was supporting him. That's why we kept having to draw on equity from my house. So I was supporting both of us. I wasn't making much money because I'd killed my business and he wasn't bringing anything in. So and this was all set up. And he had this business that was a bit of a con. He and a couple of partners had this amazing sounding startup that they were collecting investments from people. Even his best friend invested $60,000. I'm not talking about small investments, like the minimum was about 60. And they would get these investors money and then they would pull on it. So, he was doing his own things. Like I was paying for housing. He was doing his own things with his share of this investment money. Um, sorry. And I've totally lost my train of thought. Oh,
You
okay.
have, you have.
No, so I changed him out of that's what it was. In the beginning of the month, I told him, okay. I asked him again because he was telling me this story every day. Oh, with this investor's going to come in, I'm going to be able to bring in
So
5,000.
what was the final straw,
Well, no,
Rosemary?
I'm getting there. I'm getting
Okay, good, good.
So he would always say, there'll be $5,000 next week, there'll be $10,000 next week. This had gone on for years.
Mhm,
So I
mhm,
said to him, I said, how's the business doing one day? And he said, good, good. There'll be $5,000 next week. And I said to him, that's great. I'm so happy for you. Then you'll be comfortable financially to go off and find your own place because we're
mhm,
done. The relationship is dead and I want you out of here. However, at this time, I was prepping the house to sell and I was trying to do as much of it myself as I could. He was doing nothing. He never did anything to contribute to that. So I was like, washing windows, painting outside, everything. It was fall, it was October. So I was doing everything that I needed to do to get the house looking great from the outside, painting the garage doors. And the one thing I needed help with, it's a two-story house, was cleaning the underside of the fascia, around the gutters.
mhm,
Because we lived fairly close to the airport. My house was fairly close to the airport, and there was like this black soot that came from the aircraft
mhm,
fuel.
mhm,
So I wanted to get this off, and I had done all the ground floor, I don't know, soffit fascia, the part that faces the ground. And I wanted to get up to the second floor. And I said, I need you to hold the ladder. And we'd done this before. I had
mhm,
cleaned the gutters. He'd held the ladder. I'd gone up because I was good with heights. I had good balance, and he was strong. So he set up the ladder and it looked funny. And I said, that doesn't look right. And then he gave a very explosive response. It's like, oh, you're going to challenge me on that too, something like that.
mhm,
It's like, you know what? I don't want to start a fight right now. So it's like, okay, I'm just going to go up the ladder and check that I can reach what I need to reach. So
mhm,
I went up the
mhm,
ladder, and as I got up to the top, it's like, yes, this is the right height. And as I took a couple steps down, it felt really springy. Something felt different to going up. Turned out later, the neighbor across the street said that my partner had walked away from the ladder. No one was holding it, and it wasn't set up right. So a couple of steps down, the ladder fell, and I fell 16 feet. And for the first time in my life, I suffered 3 fractures in
wow.
one day.
In one day,
Yeah.
wow.
And
In one
unfortunately,
fall,
yeah, and it's a long way to fall. And the
yes.
soil was clay. Fortunately, it wasn't concrete, but I fell on clay soil.
Mhm,
And,
mhm,
yeah, I had a collapsed lung and 3 fractures. And the neighbor across the street called 911. My partner, who always had a cell phone with me, conveniently did not have it.
Mm-hmm.
So I was whisked off to Sunnybrook, and from Sunnybrook, I called my lawyer. I said, I think he just tried to kill me.
Wow.
My daughter said it first, and my heart agreed, but I wanted confirmation by
Mm-hmm.
someone not attached to family. And I called him. I said, "This is what happened." Um, once I was able to speak again, and he said, "Yes, file a police report." So I did.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until the police, I think it was a special unit. They didn't dress like police.
Mm-hmm.
They
Mm-hmm.
showed up at the house and I brought them in to speak with him. The look of shock and horror on his face is one I will never forget. And that's when he seriously decided it was time to pack his stuff and get out of there. So that was a big shift. It's like there's still part of me that struggles to believe that someone that I was that close with actually tried to kill me. But at that point, I hadn't told him I changed my will.
Mm-hmm.
So,
So this is a pragmatic question, and forgive me for taking you out of it a little bit, but
that's okay.
how long were you in a relationship with him?
He moved in with me 6 years before this happened. So I think we were together for about 10 years.
Yeah. So it took a lot of time for
Yes.
this relationship to become, well, it feels abusive to me.
It was
It was
abusive.
an
And
abusive relationship in the hands of a narcissist. And it's interesting because narcissism is such a intense topic these days. And I'm certainly
and
been fascinated by it because I've had brushes with narcissists myself. True narcissism. I mean, we all have narcissism, right? We all have self-interest. When I think of narcissism, we all have narcissism
well,
comes from narcissists who love looking at his reflection in
I
the
think we all have a
water.
strong ego, but I don't think we all have narcissism, just my
Well,
perspective.
narcissistic traits, self-interest traits.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
But
Because it's a survival
like the
technique in and of itself. Yes, go ahead.
sorry, the thing that also surprises me is like he used to like to watch Jason Bourne movies. He kind of fancied himself a bit of a Jason
Mhm,
Bourne. And
mhm,
he liked to watch con movies. And he was always talking
mhm,
about playing the long game. Even though he talked
yes,
about this all the time,
yes,
I wasn't aware that he was playing the long game with me.
yes.
Like put
Well,
up.
it's yes, abusive relationships are so insidious in their trajectory that we become almost unconscious about what is really going on.
Yeah,
And yes, so wow, let's get back to that ladder. You're
yeah,
falling off, you fell off the ladder. I know for sure that you were in an ambulance
yeah,
and that your recovery was pretty miraculous. I mean, you recovered very quickly from some very serious injuries.
yeah,
And that resulted in him leaving,
yeah.
you starting to put your life back together in a big way. And we've talked about the metaphor of the fall. And so just put that in Rosemary's words
Yeah.
and where you are now.
Yeah, it's interesting, coming out of that, I needed to find some ways to, make money that,
Yes.
I needed to make money quicker than sooner, like rebuilding my business was one option,
Mhm.
but it didn't feel quite right. And at this point in time, my body taught me a lot in my recovery. It was amazing. Just use this for example, like say this coffee mug. It does it before I was injured. It's like, yeah, it's a hefty coffee mug. But after I was injured, it was almost like this is so heavy, I can't lift it. So I learned a lot about physicality and strength, and I really did connect to my body. And just one comment about narcissists. At the point when I was in this relationship, I did not know there was such a thing as a covert narcissist. And, like my ex-husband had narcissistic tendencies. He was a performer. He was larger
Mhm,
than life. He always
mhm,
wanted to be the center of
mhm,
attention.
mhm,
And this
mhm,
and this other person, this other individual, liked to, sit with his back to the wall in a corner and observe.
mhm,
And
mhm.
it's like there's no way he can be a narcissist because, he'd want to be the life of the party if he was a narcissist.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Yes.
So yeah, so I started, it's like again, I once again had a blank canvas.
Mm, mm,
And and I grew this deep appreciation for my body because yes, I had been going to the gym and I was keeping fit and I was very active. I've been active all my life. But the way that my body was able to recover really inspired me to be more attentive to it and take
mhm,
more care of it consciously,
mhm,
rather than taking it for granted. So, I had this big blank slate, and my first notion is like, how can I make a big chunk of money quickly? So it's like, well, I've always been interested in house flipping. So, I had to move, I had to sell my house, I had to liquidate my only asset.
mhm,
So I thought, well, you know, the market's hot and I can, I watched way too much HGTV. Um, and I know a lot about building from the renovations I've done to my own houses over the years. So, let's see if this will work. So I did. I learned a lot. I had some guidance from someone in my community who knew a lot more about that. Some of the experiences were great, some of the experiences weren't, but it did give me an ability to make enough profit to support myself for the period that I was doing it. So, it's not like I made hundreds of thousands, but I managed to cover my living costs.
mhm, mhm,
And then, and while during this period, I came across, um, I came across a movie called The Wisdom of Trauma, and
mhm,
that attracted me to really delve much deeper into the into my my love for psychology,
mhm,
which
mhm,
had evolved so much since I studied it in university. And again, it was one of the shift was my mind had no idea why I was so it was almost like a magnetic pull. Or actually that isn't even it was stronger than it was like a tractor beam, if you can go for a
mhm,
Star Trek
mhm,
metaphor. It
mhm,
was like I just knew without knowing why I knew that this was what I needed to do. So I jumped into what has turned into, over 2 years of training and also a blending of my coaching expertise, my intuition, because I'm also an empath, my creativity, my therapy training, and really where I'm at today is about to make another big shift in my life, relocating to Costa Rica
mhm,
from the Niagara area of Canada. That's coming up this summer. And, I've been kind of holding back on really taking my business out there in a big way because I just very recently realized that, I've come full circle for helping people recognize their authentic selves. And I've got new tools that I can use to help people release the trauma, release the
mhm,
somatic blocks.
mhm, mhm,
And also, if they decide to choose the path of authenticity, I can support them. And more people are refusing to follow the tried and true, get a job, build,
mhm,
get a house, a
mhm.
mortgage. They're wanting to lean into something that feels more natural to them. So, as I'm in my final house flip right now, but once I get get that on the market, I will be sort of revamping my business to really support people in I'm not even sure what to call it, rewilding, weaving their own tapestry, forging their own path, following
Mhm,
the path of authenticity, but really, listening to their heart and listening to their body and
mhm,
creating a synergy between mind, body, and spirit, and just allowing who we are naturally to be the guide.
mhm, mhm. Well, you certainly have been on a journey that helps you to understand and empathize with all kinds of trauma throughout people's lives. So, um, wow, I'm just processing all that you've said, and what is bubbling up for me is these snails that you tried to rescue as a child, and how, I'm sure now you wouldn't consider anything you do connected to rescuing, but there was something inside of you that has always been drawn to um, just being empathetic and understanding of other people. And unfortunately, it's that those exact traits that narcissists are drawn to.
Mm.
I'm sure you've discovered in your own journey. So, Rosemary, how would you describe that internal thing, that siren song inside of Rosemary?
Well, I've had the opportunity in the past 2 years to really reconnect with my wild child.
Wild child.
And it's interesting too, because I've spoken about this with some colleagues, and so she's the wild child with the heart of gold.
Mm, mm.
And it's interesting, you go back to the snails, like I don't they were I'm trying to they were big. They were like this.
Okay. Yeah.
So, and the concrete driveway was not their natural habitat. So it's like, we as humans had come in and put this
Hmm.
pebbleless,
Hmm. Hmm.
piece of concrete there. And when they went on to sun themselves, if it had been dirt, no one would have wanted to drive there.
Yes. Yes.
So yeah, there's a part of me that I've become aware of that wants to help and heal and fix
Hmm.
for people. But I've learned that what's more powerful is the part of me that just wants to give people the space and the support to listen to their own inner child, to listen to their
Hmm.
heart, to tune into their gut. And gut
Hmm.
wisdom is 100% reliable.
Hmm.
If you ever
Hmm.
get stuck up here, just tune in and ask your gut what's happening. And
Yeah,
that
just shift.
exactly. Well,
Shift from here to here.
and it's
Yes.
interesting too, because the name of my company, MIBOSO, came to me when I was running, way back before I started my first business. And it's an acronym made from the first two letters of mind, body, and soul.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
it's so funny. Everyone's wanting to find their purpose. Well, I think our purpose finds us because,
Yes.
full
Yes.
circle, many years
Yes.
later, many decades later, it
Yes.
still fits. And it's going to, mind, body, soul, synergy is really where I'm moving next.
Yes. Yes, you've been my boso for as long as I've known you, and it sounds like it is still going to be part of your branding,
Yeah.
Rosemary's branding. So is there any invitation you'd like to extend to people who are listening to this about and are curious about how Rosemary may be able to help them?
Well, I'm very open to people reaching out to me.
Hmm.
As I said, shifting the website is all focused on trauma therapy, natural healing right now. But it's very easy to remember if you just think of the first two letters of mind, body, and soul. It's just miboso.com. And it has been for years. But reach out, and I'll put my email in the show notes. And yeah, just if you're ready to explore, I'm going to be reconnecting with a colleague that I met again a couple decades ago. And I remember she moved from Indiana to Florida. And one of the things she said is like, people people comment on me living in Florida. They say you're so lucky. She says there's nothing to do with luck. It just takes a lot of hard work to make the transition. And I think one of the things I'm looking forward to is helping people, just release themselves from all of the containers they've put various parts of themselves in. And when those parts are freed, just seeing like, what do they want to paint on their canvas? How is, what does their ideal life path look like?
Hmm.
Because for me, it's connecting to nature. Beauty is important for me.
Hmm.
Curiosity is important
Hmm.
for me. Always learning, never
Hmm.
regressing. That's really important for me. So and how to bring all those important elements together. And it's going to be individual for everyone.
Mhm.
And I look forward to exploring that with whoever would like to explore it with me.
Awesome. Well, I think that's a wonderful metaphor to end on, that life is a blank canvas and we get to paint on it. And based on your story, sometimes we get to erase what's on the canvas.
It's interesting. There's an oil that I did behind me. And the nice
Mhm.
thing is when you paint in oils, you can keep putting more on top,
Layering. Ah, yes.
creating
So
a
instead
depth.
of trying to erase it and get rid of it,
Mhm.
we add to it. That's
Right.
beautiful. I think that's a beautiful way to end, Rosemary.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for showing up and sharing just a few parts of your journey, because everybody's journey has so many different pieces and so many pieces parts. So thank you for sharing the important parts of your journey, and all the best in Costa Rica,
Thank you.
sale of your current place. And I look forward to sharing the rest of your journey with you.
Thank you so much. Thank you
Okay,
for having me.
take care.
Bye.